Ready to roll?
Yeah.
Welcome to date number 3 of the Psychedelic Yodelling Screaming with Mountains tour. We're here in St. Mary's Tower. Incredible space. And I've got to read this absurd one that this is Alex's prompt. Basically the whole idea was there's something absurd about the beauty of San Andrea and draws into question kind of the meaning of life almost. And that life can be somehow very absurd. So she gave us 6 different options. Write about something that matters to you but at the same time does not matter at all. Number 2, give meaning to something in the surrounding landscape, then strip it of that meaning. Number 3, take a character's denial of absurdity to the point of absurdity. Number 4, take a character's consciousness of absurdity to the point of absurdity. Number 5, write about something that does not matter as though it matters. 6, write about something that matters greatly as though it does not matter at all. And I tried to do one of them, and in the midst of it I ended up switching them around and doing lots of different absurd elements in the same story. I had seen the cyclist going up the road in San Andrea, and I wrote one story about him when he blows his knee up, and he goes back to cycling in the mountains with a fake knee, but it starts giving him pain again. And then the next day I wrote about him again, a totally different story, the same character.
Oh, he got stuck in there.
Which is kind of absurd anyway. I became a little bit obsessed with this guy called Ulrich.
Ulrich von what?
He did it a second, I can't remember what it was. For 18 years he avoided this path, and only on rare occasions charged across the footbridge, and even then with eyes downcast, hands in pockets, to the other side of the ravine. His wife hadn't wanted another child. After the birth of Ella Louise, she'd fallen into a bout of postnatal depression, culminated one morning with throwing herself off the bridge. He was never sure why he'd chosen to go on. The love of his children rebuked his wife's decision to take her own life. The secret pact he'd made with himself that when the youngest was gone off to university, he would come up here and throw himself down into the arms of his beloved. Maybe all of these things, maybe none. He struggled on as people do, tending to cattle and sheep, cutting wood, cooking meals, fixing chairs, driving the kids down the valley, driving the kids up the valley, teaching them to drive, watching them drive away to live lives of their own. He'd done it all without any real jouissance, something his children could sense, but never really understanding it. How could they? Youth told them that life was for the living. The forest path reached the footbridge, and he stepped out onto its boards. The handrail was high. He leaned over to look down at the river and the rocks. It was high enough to kill you, but not high enough to be abstract, to distance you from the fact that it was going to hurt. By the time they'd found her, she'd be lying there for hours. You could tell from her loveliness that she'd broken most of her bones, limbs in odd directions, joints twisted and mutilated, a tent with snapped poles. He put one foot up on the lower rail, but suddenly felt like the whole thing was utterly absurd. Hadn't he gotten through it all? Hadn't he kept going? The girls were all off at university, starting careers, engaged to be married. There would be grandchildren, invitations to Christmas dinner, birthdays, holidays at Lake Garda. Hadn't people often told him down in the local bar when enough beer was consumed that they admired his courage, his resilience, his fortitude? Something he never responded to, simply repeating in his head the pact he'd made with himself. When our youngest has gone to university, jump down into Lisa's arms. A promise then. Was that what it was? A promise to her who could hear nothing, was long rotten in the ground. Even if he believed in heaven, which he didn't. He didn't need to be on first names basis with the Pope to know the Church's stance on suicide. If there was a heaven, he would be not admitted. A promise to himself then, but surely breaking a promise to oneself was the easiest thing in the world. There was a pole to his right, the sign on the top warned with rockfall, landslides. The forecast was for 70 millimeters of rain this evening. The warning may very well come true. He gripped the pole with his right hand and brought a second foot up onto the rail. One leap out into the void, then nothing. Jesus, what melodrama. He was a 50-year-old man. Wasn't this all a little ridiculous? Something tickled the hand that was gripping the pole, the horns of a slug. Where did he think he was going? To the top of the pole? For what end? There was nothing to eat up there. There was no branch he could transfer to afterwards. He kept his hand still, felt the cold creep of the slug move across his flesh. It was a determined little fucker. Good suction on him. It was a good metre and a half to the top of the pole. You could see there were spots of frost, other patches half full. Worse still, a few leaves, wrapped up in abandoned cobwebs, were strewn here and there across the surface. The slug moved off his hand back onto the pole, and the change of substance, perhaps a dip in temperature, subtle shifts of friction, momentarily retarded the slug's progress. It contracted and relaxed itself, but stayed where it was. Had it exhausted itself already? Was it on the verge of falling backwards onto the ground? He could have given it a push, a gentle little prod. Something told him not to intervene, that interference would be perverse, twisted, monstrous. Then without warning, it started making progress once more, millimetre by millimetre. With the first spot of frost approaching, he didn't fancy the slug's chances. The slug's horns led the way, twitching, circling, feeling out the route. Were they able to sense changes in terrain? Were they some form of early warning system? Did they communicate to the nervous system, to the slime glands, to the contracting muscles in the body? Certainly something was going on, because at that moment he'd expected it to slip, to slide, to drop down onto the ground. It adjusted its path slightly to the left, skirted the edge of the frost, and continued on its way. Unfortunately, though, this new route was going to result in a head-on collision with the leaves trapped in an abandoned spider web. And as if heavens were conspiring against it, the rain came in early. Not a downpour, not the main act, a supple prologue. Sneaky, misty rain, kind of moisture that can drift under cuffs, down the edges of boots, and in through stitching and zippers. The slug arrived at the dead leaves, and incredibly, unbelievably, it adapted its course once more. The fucking thing was actually going to get to the top. Why it wanted to get there was irrelevant. What mattered was achieving the goal, being victorious, standing triumphant. Then the wind picked up. The leaf flapped its way sideways. The slug caught the fine edge of it. Its horns went manic, twisting this way and that. Perhaps the calculation was too complicated. Perhaps the adjustments were too intricate to be made in real time. Whatever the case, the slug lost suction, slid slightly backwards, and utterly exhausted fell backwards off the pole onto the ground. He pulled on the pole and tried to bring his body up onto the top of the rail. There was something digging into his hip. What the hell was it in his pocket? His bike lock. Oh my God, he'd forgotten to chain up his bicycle. What would they say in the village? Some youth would be riding it around town. Why are you on Ulrich's bicycle, they'd ask. Did he give you permission to ride it? What do you mean he left it there unlocked? That's utterly absurd. He got down off the rail and rushed back along.